Okay, so first of all, go into start a character script and make a local script. Then you're gonna start by referencing the local player. Then to detect when the player presses the jump key, we will need to reference the user input service. Of course, you will need to reference the humanoid, but before doing that, make sure to reference the character. It's going to be important to reference the humanoid because that's what's going to control the jumping, the landing, and the freefall states. As you probably guessed, next is going to be to reference the animator because we're going to use it later in the script to load the animation of the double jump. I'm using wait for child because we need to wait for the animator to appear inside of the character to be able to reference it correctly. To decide if the player is allowed to perform another jump, we will need a boolean that will handle that. And of course, to make it so the double jump is not spammable and looks good, we will add a little delay before being able to perform another jump, and we are going to track how many jumps the player did. In our case, we want this double jump system to have maximum 2 jumps, so the player jumps once and then the player is able to jump a second time, which is why the max jumps variable is going to be 2. If you want your system to have more than 2 jumps, you can just up this number till the amount you like. After that, we will create a function that will track each time the humanoid changes states. That means that each time the state of the humanoid changes, this function will run. For this particular system, we want to know each and every single time the player jumps, is falling, and lands. First, we're going to start by summing up the amount of jumps the player does. As you probably guessed, we set the jumps variable to 0 because when the player is walking, it's not jumping, so it didn't perform any jump. That's why we start at 0, and each time the player will press space to jump, it's going to add up to the jumping count. And as I said earlier, so it's not spammable, each time we jump, there will be a cooldown, and that's why can jump will be false, because during that cooldown, we will not be able to jump. Before we continue, let's understand what state changed actually does. State changed fires every time the humanoid changes from one state to another, as I explained earlier. I just wanted to give you an example so you can fully understand what it does. Imagine your character is walking on the ground. At that moment, the humanoid's current state is walking, alright? The moment you press space and your character starts jumping, the humanoid changes from walking to jumping. Since the state changed, in this specific example, old state would be walking and the new state would be jumping. That's why later in the script we're checking whether the humanoid's new state became jumping, and if it did, we know the player just jumped, so we can run our jump logic. Right after jumping, the player starts falling in the air, so the humanoid enters the free fall state. After 0.2 seconds, we will allow the second jump by setting can jump equals true. And when the player lands, we reset everything, meaning that the amount of jumps go back to 0, so the player can use double jump again, and can jump variable will become false again. Next and final step will be to create a function using user input service.jump request to detect each time the player presses the jump button. First of all, we will need to check if the double jump is allowed, so can jump needs to be true and the player must not have already used the 2 jumps, so the amount of jumps need to be below 2. If it reaches 2, then the player will not be able to jump again because that will mean the player already performed the double jump. Then the one line that will actually create the double jump is this line: humanoid change state enum.humanoid state type jumping. This will force the humanoid into the jumping state so the character can perform another jump. Of course, when the double jump happens, we want a double jump animation. Nah, but for real, go into toolbox, get your dummy. In my case, I'll use animation editor, so use whatever plugin you want to use to make your animation. Then once you're done, make sure to set animation priority to action, publish to Roblox, copy the ID, and then go into replicated storage and create an animation. Then paste your animation ID inside of that. To be able to play the animation, you need to load the animation. But to do that, you need to reference the replicated storage first because the animation is inside. So then you can reference the animation inside of a variable and you play the animation. If we slow things down a bit, just so you can understand what's happening, we're first getting the animator because that's the object responsible for playing and managing the animations on the character. Then we're using load animation to load our double jump animation into the animator. When Roblox does this, it creates what's called an animation animation track, which is basically a playable version of our animation. We are storing this inside of a variable beforehand, so when the player performs a valid double jump, we simply play the animation instead of having to find and load the animation again every single time. One last thing, go into the if statement of the jumping state to print the jump count. This is just for comprehension, so you're able to see with your own eyes that your jumps are being registered. Once you're done doing all that, your double jump system is now ready to go. That's how the final product looks like. We can now double jump. Our animation plays, and if you check the output, you can see each jump is being recorded and it doesn't go above the maximum amount of permitted jumps. That was it for me in this video, guys. I hope that it was helpful. If you have any questions, write them down in the comments. Other than that, take care. Bye.